Okay, so you know how like sometimes a movie comes along and everyone's talking about it, but like no one wants to admit they've actually seen it.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Well, that's kind of what we're diving into today, this whole cultural wave.
Huh, interesting.
We're talking about Deep Throat and the feminist sex wars in the 70s and 80s.
Wow, what a time, huh? So much change happening really makes you think about how women's pleasure was viewed back then, both celebrated and demonized.
Yeah, for sure. It was a real turning point.
It really was. It forced everyone to confront these, really fundamental questions about what feminism meant about sexuality and how it all fit into the changing world.
Totally. And like, who would have thought that a movie like Deep Throat would spark such a huge debate, right?
It's wild,
It
right?
became way more than just a movie. It was like a symbol.
Definitely. A symbol of the times and a huge lightning rod for all these conversations about women and sexuality.
Exactly.
Think about the context, though. The 70s, it was disco, bell-bottoms, everyone's talking about free love.
Right.
Right.
But even with all that, there was like this underlying tension.
Oh, really?
Yeah, some feminists started feeling really uncomfortable with some aspects of this so-called sexual liberation.
So it wasn't all just like peace and free love.
It was way more complicated than that. The sexual revolution brought up all these questions about power, and who really benefited from this newfound freedom.
I see. So,
Like,
yeah.
women were still fighting for basic rights back then. Equal pay, reproductive health care.
Right.
So it wasn't just about changing attitudes towards sex. It was about the whole structure of power in society.
Wow, that totally changes how you look at it.
Yeah, it makes you think.
So where do the feminist sex wars fit into all of this?
Well, as the sexual revolution kept going, more and more feminists started asking, like, can we really be liberated in a system that still treats us like objects?
I can see how that would lead to some serious soul searching.
It totally did. It was a time of intense debate, strong opinions, and lots of arguments.
Yeah, I bet. So much to unpack there. Oh, yeah, for sure.
You mentioned Deep Throat being this catalyst. How did a film like that become like the center of this whole debate?
Well, maybe it was because it was about,
Right.
think about it. Openly talking about female pleasure, I mean, that was pretty much taboo back then.
Yeah, you're right.
Even the word clitoris, people just didn't say it in public.
It's crazy to think about that now.
I know. But Deep Throat, in its own way, brought those conversations into the open.
I guess so, yeah.
Like, it forced people to actually acknowledge that female sexuality exists.
It's almost hard to imagine that level of silence now.
I know, right?
But, I mean, it shows just how radical it was to have a film that focused on female pleasure.
Yeah. Even if it was presented in an unconventional way.
Right. Unconventional is one way to put it.
And that's the key, isn't it? The movie might have seemed liberating on the surface, but at the same time, it was still telling the story from a male perspective.
Oh, I see what you mean.
So yeah, very mixed messages.
Yeah, very mixed. And this tension, this back and forth between wanting freedom but being afraid of being exploited, that's what fueled the feminist sex wars.
Exactly. And as those fears and anxieties grew, you started seeing these consciousness-raising groups popping up.
Yeah.
Safe spaces for women to just talk, share their experiences, and try to make sense of it all.
Sort of like a think tank for a new wave of feminist thought.
Exactly. And out of those conversations came some really groundbreaking feminist writing.
Like what?
Like Ann Coates' essay, The Myth of the Vaginal Orgasm, published in 1968.
Wow, what a title.
I know, right? What's so amazing about that essay is that Coates basically challenged everything people thought they knew about female sexuality.
Like what?
Well, she basically said that men aren't necessary for women to have an orgasm.
Wow, imagine the impact of that statement back in the late 60s.
Huge. It completely changed the conversation, and it was happening even before Deep Throat came out.
So, the film, while it brought female pleasure into the spotlight, also kind of reinforced the power structures that feminists were trying to challenge.
Exactly. It was like a mirror reflecting the divisions that were already forming within the feminist movement.
And those divisions just got deeper as the 70s went on, right?
Oh, yeah. By the late 70s, there was a clear split. The anti-pornography feminists on one side and the pro-sex feminists on the other.
And that's where things really start to heat up, right?
Yeah.
What were each side's main points?
Well, you had the anti-pornography feminists like Andrea Dworkin and Robin Morgan. Their work was really powerful, often connecting pornography directly to violence against women.
And they argued that it kept women in these limited roles, right?
Yeah, they saw it as a tool of oppression, a way to silence women.
It sounds really radical.
It was. But their focus was on the power dynamics in pornography, how it often showed women as, like, subservient.
Okay, so they were
Yeah.
challenging the power structures behind it.
Exactly. Then on the other side, you have the pro-sex feminists like Ellen Willis. They were all about women's freedom to explore their desires without judgment.
And they saw the fight for sexual liberation as part of the bigger feminist movement, right?
Yes, it was all about reclaiming control over their bodies and choices.
So to them, trying to censor pornography was just another form of control, coming from a different direction.
You got it. They felt that censoring would limit women's autonomy.
It's like both sides, even though they disagreed, were ultimately fighting for the same thing.
That's a great point. They wanted liberation, but had very different ideas about how to get there.
And all those differences came to a head in 1982 at the Barnard Conference on Sexuality, right?
Exactly. Imagine all these brilliant, passionate feminists all in one room, all deeply invested in this issue, but with totally different viewpoints.
Sounds intense. What happened?
Well, both sides came ready to argue, ready to defend their positions. And the media, of course, loved it. They focused on the conflict, not the nuances of the debate.
Oh, yeah. I can see the headlines now. Feminists at war.
Exactly. And then to make things even more complicated, issues of race and power dynamics entered the conversation. Women of color were pointing out the unique challenges they faced in both navigating sexual freedom and within the feminist movement itself.
It's like, who gets to define what feminism and sexual liberation even mean, right?
Exactly. And all of this was happening as the political landscape was shifting too. Reagan was in office, things were becoming more conservative, and that really changed the debate around pornography and women's rights.
Wow, it's all so interconnected.
It really is. And we'll dig more into that next time when we talk about the push for anti-pornography legislation and the infamous Meese Commission.
Okay, I'm hooked.
And of course, we can't forget about Linda Lovelace, the star of Deep Throat. Her story became a major part of this whole cultural war.
Yeah, that'll be fascinating to hear about.
It's a complex story, and it takes us right into the rise of third-wave feminism and how they grappled with the legacy of the sex wars.
I can't wait to hear more.
It's quite a journey, that's for sure.
I'm ready for it.
Good. Well, until next time.
Okay, so last time we were talking about how divided the feminist movement had become, and this whole battle over pornography was just getting started.
It was. And as we moved into the 80s, things really escalated. The anti-pornography movement gained a lot of momentum.
Right.
They weren't just critiquing it culturally anymore, they were taking legal action.
Interesting.
And this is when figures like Catherine McKinnon became really prominent.
Oh, yeah, I remember hearing her name. She was a lawyer, right?
Yeah, a legal scholar and activist. Her arguments were super influential.
What was her main point? It's been a while.
Well, she basically reframed pornography as a civil rights violation.
Wow. All right.
She argued that it directly harmed women, that it was all about keeping women unequal and subordinate.
I see.
And she was actually involved in drafting laws that defined pornography as sex discrimination.
So women could sue producers and distributors.
Exactly.
That's pretty radical. Did it work?
It's kind of a mixed bag. They had some wins, definitely.
Right.
Like, they got these ordinances passed in places like Indianapolis, but then a lot of them got struck down in higher courts.
Ah, I see. Because of free speech issues.
Yeah, a lot of the time it was First Amendment stuff.
So it was this constant legal battle going back and forth.
Totally. And the political climate wasn't exactly helpful to their cause.
Right. Reagan was president. It was a very conservative time.
Exactly. And that conservative shift played a big role in how the debate around pornography unfolded.
How so?
Well, it led to the creation of the Meese Commission in 1986.
Ah, yes, the Meese Commission.
You've heard of it.
Yeah. The name rings a bell, but I don't remember the specifics. Remind me.
Sure. So this was a federal commission, and they were supposed to be investigating the link between pornography and violence.
Okay.
And Edwin Meese, the attorney general at the time, he was a big supporter of this whole thing. He was very conservative.
I see. So what did they find?
Well, it was super controversial. They relied on a lot of, like, anecdotal evidence, personal stories, interpretations of research that many experts thought were flawed.
So not exactly the most rigorous approach.
A lot of people felt like they were basically cherry-picking data to fit their conclusions,
Oh, wow.
which was that there was a direct link between pornography and violence against women.
But wasn't there a lot of pushback against that
Oh,
conclusion?
yeah, tons. There wasn't really strong scientific evidence to back it up.
Right, right.
And they even interviewed Linda Lovelace, the star of Deep Throat.
Oh, right. What was her take on it all?
Well, at this point, she had publicly denounced her role in the film.
Really?
Yeah, she said she'd been coerced and abused by her husband and manager, Chuck Traynor.
It's like her story went from being this symbol of sexual liberation to, like, a cautionary tale.
It really did. Both sides were using her story to support their own agendas.
That's so sad.
It is. It shows how easy it is for real people's lives to get caught up in these cultural and political battles.
So even though it was criticized, the Mies Commission still had an impact, right?
Definitely. Obscenity prosecutions went up. There were all these attempts to restrict access to adult material.
Through laws and local ordinances?
Exactly. But a lot of those efforts were challenged, often on First Amendment grounds.
So the courts were often pushing back against these attempts to censor pornography.
Yeah, they were kind of check on that conservative push, but the Mies Commission definitely shifted the conversation.
And not necessarily in a good way.
Not for everyone, no. It contributed to this climate of fear around pornography.
It feels like we're back to that central tension, right?
Totally. Freedom versus protection.
Right. And in the middle of all this, the feminist movement was struggling to deal with all the internal conflict.
Yeah, the infighting, the media attention, it really took a toll.
And made it harder for feminists to present a united front on other issues, I bet.
For sure. It's classic divide and conquer.
Oh, yeah, totally.
But as the 80s ended and we moved into the 90s, a new generation of feminists started to emerge.
This is what we call third wave feminism, right?
Yep. And they brought a whole new perspective to the table.
Were they able to bridge the divide from the sex wars?
That's what we'll talk about next time.
So we've talked about the feminist sex wars, how they divided the movement, and all the arguments and legal battles that came out of it. Now we're moving into the 90s, the era of third wave feminism. It feels like a whole new chapter.
It was. Third wave feminism was all about responding to what came before it, trying to create a more inclusive and nuanced understanding of feminism.
And how did they try to do that? I mean, were they able to bridge the divide created by the sex wars?
Well, the sex wars kind of created this binary, right? Pro-sex versus anti-pornography. Third wave feminism wanted to move beyond that, to make space for more perspectives.
So not just one right way to be a feminist.
Exactly. They really emphasized individual agency and choice.
Okay, I see. More voices, more choices. But what about pornography? How did third wave feminism approach that?
Well, there is definitely still debate within the movement, but some third wave feminists embraced sex positivity,
Yeah.
They were advocating for ethical and consensual pornography, stuff that celebrated diverse sexualities and empowered women.
So instead of trying to censor it, they wanted to make the industry better.
Yeah, that was the focus for some. But not everyone agreed, of course. Some third-wave feminists were still critical of the industry. They argued that it could still be harmful, that it could perpetuate stereotypes and exploit women, especially within a system that often prioritizes profit over people.
Right. So the conversation continued, but with new perspectives.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons from all of this. These issues are complicated. There aren't any easy answers. What we need is dialogue, listening to different viewpoints and understanding that feminism is always changing.
So looking back at the feminist sex wars, what are some key takeaways? What can we learn from that time and apply to how we navigate sexuality and gender today?
Well, I think one of the most important things is recognizing the diversity of women's experiences. Feminism is at its best when it includes a wide range of voices, even those that challenge us. It's about making space for those tough conversations.
Yeah, even when they're uncomfortable.
Exactly. Another important takeaway is the need to be critical of cultural products like pornography, to really think about how they shape our views on sexuality, power, and gender roles. It's not about condemning everything or just accepting it blindly, but taking an informed approach that allows for critique, discussion, and even pleasure.
It's finding that balance, right?
Right. And the feminist sex wars remind us that there aren't any simple solutions when it comes to these kinds of complex issues. It's about having those difficult conversations, even with people we disagree with, and continuing to imagine a better world.
That's a great point. Thanks for taking us on this deep dive into the history of the feminist sex wars. It was definitely fascinating and a little bit challenging at times.
It was a pleasure.
We hope you found it insightful and maybe even empowering. And until next time, keep those conversations going.